All right, so here's what we were just talking about. Photosynthesis. I've already looked at this slide, although I did replace it because I wanted the sugar in there. Yours doesn't have that for some reason. So, as we look at this diagram,
Let's draw this.
yeah, you can, sure. You can probably draw the glucose coming out of the Calvin cycle. So we're looking at the chloroplast. This whole thing represents the chloroplast. Okay, these are the thylakoids. And the two parts of photosynthesis are here. On the left, we have our light-dependent reactions, which obviously require light. The light reactions take in water, split it, produce oxygen. They also produce ATP and NADP, which are two molecules which can carry energy. Send that energy over to the Calvin cycle, where carbon dioxide is taken in, transformed into sugar. Products of the Calvin cycle are ADP and NADP, which are then go back into light reactions to sort of be recycled. So if we look on the outside here, we have our basic formula for photosynthesis. Light plus water plus carbon dioxide produces oxygen and glucose. All right, so when we talk about photosynthesis, when we talk about cellular respiration next, we're not going to get into too many of the details. We're going to mention this. You're going to learn next year in chemistry about redox reactions. Okay. Redox reactions, that stands for reduction and oxidation. These are types of reactions in which electrons are transferred from one molecule to another. And often these redox reactions are used in living organisms to transfer energy from one place to another, from one molecule to another. So the way that a lot of times people remember what these reactions are is by remembering the word oil rig. When we say a molecule is oxidized, if you remember the word oil, oxidation is losing an electron. Reduction is gaining an electron. Okay, so if a molecule loses an electron, we say that it's been oxidized. If a molecule gains an electron, we say it's been reduced. And so in biology, often we talk about redox reactions as involving not just electrons moving, but often they're accompanied by hydrogen. So when, in biology, often if a molecule is losing hydrogen atoms, we say it's been oxidized. And when it's gaining hydrogen atoms, we say it's been reduced. And the movement of these electrons and these hydrogen atoms really represents the movement of energy. So if a substance has been oxidized by losing a hydrogen atom, basically it's losing energy. And if a molecule is gaining an electron, gaining hydrogen atoms, it's gaining energy. And so these reactions always happen in pairs, because if one molecule is losing an electron, that has to be gained by another molecule. So one thing gets oxidized and one gets reduced. So they always occur together. And you see in this example, you have a molecule here that's going to be losing an electron. Therefore, it's getting oxidized. This molecule is going to gain that electron. It's going to be getting reduced. Okay. And so we'll talk about this a little more when we look at the energy carrier molecules in photosynthesis and respiration. All right, so the light-dependent reactions. Obviously, they need light. And the basics, we just were to say in a sentence, what happens in the light-dependent reactions? They're taking in light, capturing that energy. Obviously, light has energy. And they use it to produce ATP and NADPH, energy carrier molecules. The light reaction, the light-dependent reactions happen in those stacks of poker chips inside the chloroplast. And this kind of little model here tries to convey what happens in the light-dependent reactions. First, a photon of light, a particle of light basically, hits the chloroplast, hits some special molecules which we'll talk about in a minute. And what it does, and that's what's represented here, that energy coming in excites an electron, bumps it up to a higher energy level. Okay. And then that energy, that high energy electron sort of gets passed from one molecule to another. But as it does that, it does some work. Okay, what that electron does is it helps to pump hydrogen ions on one side of the membrane. And then that electron, as it gradually gives up that energy, another photon of light enters and excites that electron again. And then that energy is transferred to NADPH. Okay, so when the energy comes into the chloroplast, that's what it's doing. It's bumping up these electrons to higher energy levels. Just like if you pump some water, if you somehow use some energy, pumped water up to the top of a hill, as it then flows down the hill, you could use that energy to do work. The same thing is happening here with these electrons. Or if you imagine this way, a roller coaster. So I'm sure you've all ridden or seen a roller coaster. Does the cart of a roller coaster have like a motor in it? No. Where does the energy come from then? How can you go through these loops and go up these huge hills and corkscrew?
Like that's like the thing that moves the car.
Momentum.
Like when you're going up.
So the only energy being added to your roller coaster cart happens usually when?
When you're going up.
It's like an opposite force.
At the very beginning, right? When you come on, when you get in the little cart, in the little hut, right? You get in the cart. What always happens right after that?
It pulls.
Right? You go up this really big hill, and you can hear like the track. It's pulling your car up there. That pulls the cart to the very top. Once you go over that first hill, there's no motor generating any extra power. All the power comes because you were pulled up that huge hill, and now you're using that energy to go through the rest of the run of the roller coaster. Now, once in a while, you'll get to another part. You ever been on a roller coaster where you get to another part and it drags you up again?
Yeah.
That's kind of like this, right? This is getting this electron to a high energy level is dragging up that first hill. And then that energy is released as you go down the roller coaster. If you get to another hill, get dragged up, the same thing can happen. But in this case, instead of going through loops and corkscrews and so forth, that energy is being used to do some other things. It's being used to make ATP and NADPH. So this is kind of a diagram that represents all of this. What the heck is going on here? So this membrane, you can see this phospholipid bilayer, that's a membrane in the chloroplast. And stuck inside of the chloroplast, this membrane in the grana, are these proteins. Okay, all of these little colorful things are proteins that are stuck inside that membrane. And some of these contain pigments, like chlorophyll and other pigments, that can absorb energy. So if we move from left to right, we can sort of break down and look at what's going on here. So light comes in. Okay. And this is called Photosystem Ii. It's a molecule, very complex molecule of pigments stuck in the membrane. As light hits this Photosystem Ii, a couple things happen. First of all, water gets split, producing oxygen. You know, that's one of the things that happens in the light-dependent reactions. Water gets split. The other thing that happens is an electron gets bumped up in its energy level. And then that high energy electron goes from one molecule to another. The names are not important. Okay? Eventually ending up here. So as this electron's traveling down and losing that electron, what's happening is it's pumping hydrogen ions inside of this membrane. That's what these hydrogens represent. Once that electron gets here, again, another light photon hits it, bumps it up again, higher energy level, where that energy is used to take NADP and make it into NADPH. Again, the hydrogen ions that are inside are building up as this happens, and there's a higher concentration of hydrogen here, a lower concentration here, so we know which way do the hydrogen ions want to go. They want to go out, so up, and when they do, they pass through this little protein called ATP synthase, and as they do, that's used to produce ATP. So we have NADPH produced here, we have ATP produced here, and that complex process is what we call the light-dependent reactions. It happens in this membrane. So light excites an electron, electrons go back down to lower energy level, but in the process pump hydrogen in. Another electron gets excited by the light energy, gets transformed. It transforms NADP into NADPH, and then hydrogen ions come through producing ATP. This complex process is the light-dependent reactions. And so we know this NADPH, this ATP, are going to be used here in the light-independent reactions, in the Kelvin cycle. We should know they also only occur in the light because they require those two things from the light-dependent reaction. They happen in a different place. They happen in the stroma, the liquid surrounding those grana in the chloroplast. And in a sentence, you can say ATP and NADPH are used to convert carbon dioxide into sugar. That's what happens in the Kelvin cycle. ATP and NADPH from the light-dependent reactions are used to make a sugar. So this is what it looks like. I'll go back and forth a little bit. So this is the Kelvin cycle. Again, pretty complex diagram. You don't need to know all the details, just sort of the basics. And so we can think of the light-independent reactions as happening in three phases. First, we need carbon dioxide. This is where the carbon dioxide is needed for photosynthesis. It's needed in the light-independent reactions. So the carbon dioxide, you need 3 carbon dioxides to come in to this cycle. And what happens first is they get captured. They get attached to this special compound called ribulose biphosphate, RuBP. And they get temporarily stored there. And then ATP and NADPH are used to sort of transform these molecules into several different precursors. But eventually, after this process, after using ATP and using the energy from ADPH, produces these molecules called G3P. This is what's going to become glucose eventually. The process continues to regenerate this RuBP so that it can work again to capture some more carbon. So this is the light-independent reaction. Carbon is fixed by attaching carbon dioxide to this ruby P molecule, 5-carbon sugar, which gets transformed, eventually forming this G3P. And this G3P, we said photosynthesis produces glucose, but we don't really see glucose being produced here. Because what's really produced is this G3P, which is a type of sugar basically. It's then later on transformed into glucose. It's kind of a generic sugar. It's a 3-carbon sugar that can be turned into lots of different things by the plant. It can be turned into glucose, but also other things, proteins, lipids, cellulose. This is what the molecular or the structural formula looks like of G3P. It's called glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate, that's what it stands for. But again, you can see in the plant it can be transformed into several different products. One important one, which is, so that's photosynthesis. So what affects photosynthesis? What factors? Well, probably it's sort of common sense. What kind of factors affect the rate of photosynthesis? Carbon dioxide levels are important. If you don't have enough carbon dioxide, you can't make glucose. Carbon dioxide is required. How much light there is. Obviously, the light-dependent reactions require light. So the amount of light will impact the rate of photosynthesis. And also temperature is important. Right? As temperature increases, chemical reactions generally take place more quickly, within reason. And so increasing temperature leads to greater photosynthesis. Now what you'll see here, if we look at these graphs, light intensity. So at very low levels of light, you have no photosynthesis. And as the amount of light increases, the rate of photosynthesis increases. But it sort of gets maxed out at a certain point. When adding more light is not going to allow photosynthesis to happen any quicker because it's being limited by other factors. Same thing with carbon dioxide. If there's no carbon dioxide, you can't have any photosynthesis. Increasing carbon dioxide levels increase the rate of photosynthesis, but again, that maxes out at a certain point. And temperature, like we said, looks like one of those graphs of enzyme activity, because that's what this really is. Photosynthesis requires the action of all these different enzymes that we were just talking about. And so if we heat up, as temperature increases, the rate of those enzyme action increases, but it gets to an optimum, and then increased temperature actually makes the reaction happen more slowly, eventually stopping completely. Those are all factors that affect photosynthesis. So we know that photosynthesis takes place in the chloroplast of cells. And where do you find chloroplast?
Plants.
In plants? Where in plants? All parts of the plant?
Leaves.
Mostly in the leaves. Do any plants have chloroplast in their stems?
Sure, probably.
Yeah. Some do. Depends. Woody plants don't. A tree, a maple tree, there's no chloroplast in the trunk of the tree. Okay, those chloroplasts are mainly in the leaves. But herbaceous plants, plants that grow annually, this plant, for example, okay, has its leaves. These plants, these succulents, they have some chloroplast in the stem of them as well. And so Most of it, though, is in the leaves of the plants. The leaves are adapted for photosynthesis. And if we were to look inside of a leaf at a cross-section, whereas this is the top of the leaf, this is the bottom, the leaf sort of has these layers. And it depends on the type of plant, really. Some plants are missing certain parts or the structure is a little bit different. But typical of a plant around, a plant like the ones that are growing here, the upper part of the leaf is covered with this sort of waxy substance. Can you guess what its purpose is? What would a waxy substance do for a plant?
Protect it, keep it.
Could be protective against insects, things like that. Helps reduce the amount of water loss as well. Beneath that waxy layer is the epidermis, sort of the uppermost layer. On the bottom, there's also a lower epidermis. And in between, there are the layer called the mesophyll, meso meaning in the middle. And it has actually two parts. The upper portion is called the palisade layer. It has these sort of rectangular, elongated vertical cells. And then there's the spongy layer, which has a lot more gaps in it. There's also these structures, they're called stoma, sometimes called stomates, which act as openings that lead into the plant, into the leaf. On each side of this opening are these special types of cells, they're called guard cells, that basically can open or shut this opening when necessary. So this tells you just in a little bit more detail about the various layers of the plant cell. What's not shown here are the vascular tissues in the leaf. If you look at a leaf, you know how they have veins going through them? Those veins are vascular tissues. They're made of xylem and phloem, which carries sugars, carries water, carries minerals out to the leaves. And you see the cuticle, that waxy layer on top, the epidermis, those flattened cells on the top and on the bottom. Most photosynthesis takes place here in that palisade layer. There's lots of chloroplasts present. The spongy layer has all that aerospace, and that's to allow gas to come in. Because we know photosynthesis requires carbon dioxide, and for that carbon dioxide to get to these chloroplasts, comes in through these openings, these stoma, and into the spongy layer where it can reach these cells for photosynthesis. This is what the stomate look at if you were to look straight on at them rather than in cross-section. And so these cells on each side, these are the guard cells. This is an actual microscopic image. These are the guard cells. The opening in the middle is called the stoma. Okay. And they open and close, allowing material in and out of the leaf. And oftentimes what happens is in the daytime, these openings are open, allowing carbon dioxide in so the plant can go through photosynthesis. But the problem is when they're open, they also allow water to leave the plant. And so the plant can dry out. And so oftentimes at night, they close up, preventing water loss, okay? Because at that time, the plant doesn't need carbon dioxide because it's not going through the process of photosynthesis. The way these work, the way that the guard cells open and close, is based on osmosis. In the daytime, these guard cells, they have lots of chloroplasts in them. So therefore, they make glucose. That leads to them being hypotonic, water flows into them, causing them to swell open and keeping that space open. At night, okay, they stop making that glucose, that sugar gets used up for energy, and water leaves those guard cells, causing them to sort of collapse, closing the opening in between. And that's how these guard cells open and close, allowing for the water in and out. Any questions about photosynthesis?